Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and a happy Wednesday to our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody is doing well out there on this warm, if you're warm throughout most of the United States. But I hope everybody is staying cool and having a great midway point of the summer. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts to your Bayou Blitz podcast. Joining me is my partner. Probably most of his sports background things are in still packed or en route. But yeah, he's here nonetheless. Brendan Boylan. Happy Wednesday, Brendan.
Yeah, happy Wednesday to you. Yeah, they're in boxes. I also have just rooms of the new place that aren't even ready to be set up for things. Like prime example, and for you guys at home watching that may be moving, maybe you moved before. Most people move a couple times in their life. Um, Make sure you have everything together.
Yeah.
I brought up a whole queen size bed frame for our guest bedroom just to realize I don't have any hardware for the queen size bed frame.
Done that 3 times, my friend. One of those 3 times we just said screw it and got a new bed.
So I think I have to order some, or just try to make it work because right now the only option through Amazon, I'm going to be waiting until almost September for the hardware. So there's got to be other solutions to the problem. But we'll find out. But yes, and I'm in my kitchen at my kitchen table. My dogs are somewhere. If I can hear them. Sooner than later, we'll get back to having an actual backdrop, some other things, some other odds and ends. But let's talk about football. First off, anybody in the comments that wants to let me know, I don't have a Xbox Series X or a PS5. So for those of you who do, how's the new college football game? Is it as good as everybody says it is? I do want to know. My friends say it's great. I'm still salty that the FCS is not included. You have FCS Midwest, and you're like, no, give the FCS schools their teams. Dang it, I want to play as my alma mater. Whenever I can actually afford an Xbox Series X. But I digress. It's still quiet in the off season, and you and I kind of alluded to, in a weird way, it's refreshingly different than usual off seasons for the New Orleans Saints. And typically when it's quiet, it's a good thing, especially post-draft. And you're so late in free agency. Like, yes, there are still some guys out there, but the Saints aren't going to be making any huge moves or anything like that. And you're not having dudes get in a whole lot of trouble. Alvin Kamara is your only talking point. And we're going to talk about him tonight. But Bob, quiet off season means that we can speculate on some things. So,
yeah, probably the same thing everybody else is speculating about is Alvin Kamara's contract situation worrisome or distracting whatsoever. My short answer to that is absolutely not. On both cases, not worrisome, not yet, and certainly not a distraction. People, as sports fans are apt to do, people are making an extremely big deal out of a couple. I guess you can call them cryptic tweets or Instagram posts. Alvin a couple of days ago posted something on either his Instagram or Twitter, something along the lines of "Let's get started" or "Let's get it started." And then earlier today, you and I were talking just before we went on the air. Alvin posted something on his Instagram. I don't believe it was anything more than a photo of him, in a Saints uniform. But again, people were making a big deal out of it. It's just it's a tweet, it's a comment, it's a post. But I mean, I see the worry behind it. First of all, let's point out that Alvin Kamara has been the major New Orleans Saints news for the last 3 off seasons now. Luckily, this third off season is the least worrisome of the 3 because the other 2 were, as you remember, and as we got sick of talking about, the other 2 off seasons were legal issues. So there's nothing legally worrisome about this. It's just whether Alvin Kamara is willing to report to training camp without a new deal, and or B, Are Kamara and the Saints going to reach a deal before training camp? There it is. There's your drama.
I'll take that drama over anything
Mm-hmm.
that we've dealt with over the last few years. To your point, people should be used to cryptic social media posts. I won't just limit it to tweets or Instagram. Like at this point in life, we should be going, you know what? Yeah, that makes sense. You know, you're a professional athlete, you're in contract disputes. I expect some cryptic messages. And a lot of times they don't mean anything
Mm-hmm.
at all. And
With Mike Thomas, it always did. But that's about it. Other New Orleans Saints players, they just say stuff to say stuff. It means nothing, like you said.
And that's just how it goes. And, read into it what you will, but ultimately it's, yeah, let me put this out here to make sure, the team still knows and people in my circle and people in their circle still know. And it is what it is. Or it could just genuinely be a guy who's like, you know what, I'm excited to play football whenever that time comes.
Go figure.
Isn't that insane? Guys who play football for a living may be excited to play, wait for it, football. Whoa, what a concept, right? But let's talk about the running backs. And we've titled this kind of series, if you will, Camp Battles. Now, you guys might be rolling your eyes at home going, what do you mean camp battle? Like, we know who the starting running back is, Brendan. Like, there's going to be positions where we know who the starters are. Yeah, you do. And I don't know if I necessarily feel it's a camp battle, like a starting job, but it's going to be a camp battle for reps in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a camp battle for, what word do I want to use? It's going to be a camp battle for Kamara, Williams, and Miller to show a new offensive coordinator
Mm-hmm.
how they fit within his plans and in his schemes and within certain formations, right? So yeah, reps are very similar, but aside from actually getting touches, showing, hey, look, in this set, this is who fits best. And I think it's more interesting this year because towards the end of the year last year, you and I started having a lot of conversations regarding Kendra Miller.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we had enough conversations about Jamal Williams. And that's where I want to start our conversation today, is with Jamal, who had led the league in rushing touchdowns the year prior to joining the New Orleans Saints and notoriously finished with one rushing touchdown last year, thanks to a cheap shot, if you want to call it that, against the Atlanta Falcons, faking the kneel down and handing the ball off to Jamal to score a touchdown. I think Jamal was put in a little bit of a tough spot last year, Bob, because of the suspension to Kamara, the injury to Kendra Miller, and maybe Williams not being utilized the way that he anticipated to be utilized, nor the way the Saints wanted to utilize him due to, again, suspension, injuries, etc. I think under Clint Kubiak, he has a good opportunity to redefine that role a little bit more thoroughly and become a guy for the Saints that is not a guy who runs the ball 15 times a game, is a guy that is probably in that 8 to 10 range of carries a game, just depending on situations, depending on the game. There's a lot of things that go into that, right? But being a guy that is more of a complement to Alvin Kamara, maybe you usually say change of pace, or at least you used to. New NFL, new days, new styles of things. But you used to say change of pace when you pulled out a guy like Deuce McAllister and you brought in a guy like Reggie Bush.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to say the same thing, but flip it. It's a change of pace from an explosive, dynamic guy from Alvin Kamara and changing the pace to, you know what, I just want someone to bulldoze you real quick and, fight for a tough 4-yard, 3-4 yard game. I see that being more of Jamal Williams' role next year. But before we jump too deep into what is his role for this upcoming season, let's flash it back to last year. A lot of Saints fans will straight up tell you disappointing from Jamal Williams a season ago. Bob, what was your takeaways and analysis from Williams' first year in the Bayou?
Yeah, disappointing would be certainly the term I'd use. Jamal only got the one touchdown, like you said. More worrisome to me was that he averaged less than 3 yards per carry. And this was for a New Orleans team that had a combined 3.6 per rush last year. That was the second worst number in the National Football League. And the worst of the worst was Williams, who came in, as I said, at less than 3 yards per carry. Now, Jamal Williams has never been a breakaway back, never been a guy that can take it 80 yards in the blink of an eye. That's not his style, and that's fine. But he's an in-between the tackles runner, and you need that guy to average really close to 4 yards per carry. In other words, you don't want to get behind the sticks if you run Jamal Williams between the tackles on a first down or a second and long. And that's what was happening. Now, of course, this isn't all Jamal's fault, nor was it all Kamara's, Kendre Miller, Taysom Hill. The offensive line was a major contributor to these struggles. But the best backs have always been able to create things on their own. And that's where I think the New Orleans backfield as a whole came up very short of expectations last year. But staying on Jamal Williams, early in the season when Kamara was suspended, Jamal had his opportunities. In fact, a lot of us weren't all that worried about a Kamara suspension because we thought, hey, Jamal Williams was signed exactly for this purpose. Yes, he's a different kind of back than Alvin, but the ground game is unlikely to suffer very much. Well, in the first 2 games, it did. And then Jamal unfortunately sustained, if I'm not mistaken, it was either an ankle or a hamstring injury. I do not remember which one, but it got him landed on injured reserve. And by the time he came back after 4 or 5 weeks, Kamara, of course, was back. Jamal had to be worked into the offense, and they never really had found an ideal role for him. Which again is the fault of A, the offensive line, and B, the coaches, but also C, Jamal, because when he did get his opportunities, he didn't play well enough to force the coaches to keep him on the field or force the coaches to force him into the lineup. So that's where I put the onus on Jamal Williams. I still believe he's a good back. I still believe he has a nice fit for this offense. Now, and we'll get into more of this in a minute, the camp battle that we're referring to here is not for the starting job. That's Alvin's. It's for who's going to get the most reps behind Alvin Kamara. Is it going to be Kendre Miller, like a lot of people, myself included, expect? Or is Jamal Williams going to go not so quietly into the night and say, wait a minute, young buck, they brought me in here, to be the inside guy of the inside-outside duo of Kamara in this offense. Jamal Williams does have a lot to prove this training camp, but he doesn't have a lot of mileage on his legs. Throughout his entire career, with the exception of 2 years ago in Detroit, throughout the rest of his 7-year career, he has always been in a shared backfield duty. Which means he's not getting a high volume of carries. He's not getting a high volume of touches. So he is not necessarily wearing down. I still think this guy has a lot of football left, and I still believe that a good offensive coordinator such as Clint Kubiak can and will find a role for Jamal if he plays well.
I want to touch on some of the things here in the chat. Hello, Jerry, Sonny, 504 Company, and Fear. Let's get to Fear's comment first. I'll throw it up on the screen. Back in 2009, the Saints had Bush, Thomas, and Bell. Can Kendre Miller be the Bell in this running back room? I actually think he'd be more suited for Pierre Thomas, which is tough because I don't know if I've seen a running back like Pierre Thomas. Obviously, you can make the argument. I don't know if it's much of an argument to say that Pierre Thomas is the best screen back of all time.
You can't name, other than maybe Marshall Faulk, you can't name many better.
I'm going to say in terms of that size and agility and the ability to catch the ball well in a backfield, I'll say Matt Forte is probably a good comp.
Yeah.
I liked Forte, obviously, coming out Louisiana area as well, but I would see Miller being more of that. I mean, if you want to say Kamara and Reggie Bush, I still think that nobody quite touched what Reggie Bush was at his peak. Now, given injuries played a big role in derailing his NFL career, not just in New Orleans, but later on as well. But I could see Miller being more of the Pierre Thomas, if you will, and Jamal being more of the Mike Bell, who got the least amount of touches out of that running back.
But if you recall, Mike Bell, in that trio, Mike Bell was mainly the goal line specialist, the short yardage specialist. And that's what I kind of expect Jamal Williams to be. That's not, again, if Jamal plays well, if he outplays Kendre Miller, he'll get more touches than that and more opportunities than that. But at the very least, I do think that Jamal Williams kind of might fit into that Mike Bell role, playing him close to the goal line, playing him in short yardage situations. And if you want to use the term change of pace, when you bring a Jamal Williams into the game, again, as long as he's playing well, that still gives you a viable enough threat in the backfield where you can keep Kendre Miller or Alvin Kamara or all three of them on the field and use them to split them out wide, use them in motion out of the backfield. And when you do so, when you do line Kamara out wide, unlike the last really 3 seasons, you still have a viable threat in the backfield if you have Jamal Williams back there.
Well, and if you go back and you throw on the film, the Kubiak systems, known very well for having 2, sometimes even 3 guys in the backfield with his quarterback. And you could sit there and you could play all the situations and scenarios in your head. If you wanted to have 3, you could go, well, we got Kendre and we got Alvin, and Taysom Hill's going to be out in the slot, and Jamal. And I mean, you could get really creative. And I hope we see some of that out of Kubiak early on. 504 Co says most of the offensive issues last year was scheme, not players, just my opinion. I'm going to say it's 50-50, especially depending on which players you're referring to.
Right.
But yes, a lot of the issues, and Bob and I think we're known for this at this point. We ripped the team in the system a year ago because it was that bad. And to have the amount of talent that this team had offensively, and there to be weeks where you're just going like this, like I don't even know what kind of animal that is, but you know the meme and the animal going like that. I don't know. It's
well,
like,
your meme from last season would be the shrug of the shoulders. My meme would be angry face and middle finger.
Okay, well there you go. But I watched a lot of games. Just what is this? Like, you are too talented to have games where you score like less than 20 points on a regular basis. And I don't know. Am I crazy? You guys say in the chat. Am I crazy to think that an average NFL offense, should be putting up like 20 points a game or averaging 20 points a game? And there were stretches throughout the Saints season last year where they just didn't. That's bad. That's bad. But
well, and I get it. I get that so many people want to blame the coaches and the scheme. And I'm right there with you. I do put a lot of the blame on those coaches and the scheme and the lack of imagination and the lack of ability to adjust in game. But I also submit this: at the end of the day, it's the player's job to execute. No matter what that scheme is, it's still your job. And in a professional athlete's case, it's your job that you're getting paid millions of dollars to do, to just simply beat the other guy across from you or play better than the other guy across from you. So in my view, the players deserve a large part of this as well. Now, once everybody gets up to speed in Kubiak's system, we're really only then will it be telling whose fault it was more of last season, players or coaches. If the players continue to struggle, then you got to absolve Pete Carmichael and some of those other coaches of a little bit of the blame, not all, because again, you win as a team, but you also lose as a team. It wasn't all Pete Carmichael's fault that they lost. It wasn't all Dennis Allen's fault that they lost. It wasn't all Derek Carr's fault that they lost. Some weeks more than others, certainly. But again, at the end of the day, these players get paid and are under the expectation to execute and simply play better than the guy across the line of scrimmage from you.
I don't know if I could say it better. I'll kind of close on this as we close the chapter on last year for Jamal Williams in this conversation. Frustrating. But he was asked to do things he shouldn't have been asked to do. That's situational. Scheme-wise, there's a lot of just hand the ball to Jamal and see if he can, fall forward for a yard.
Right.
Coaching. But there's also the fact that there were games where you didn't really see the Jamal Williams of old. You just saw, let me fall forward for a yard here. Let me fall forward for 2 yards here. Let me fall backwards for a yard. And some of that, I'm sure, just like any human being, if the only play call you ever get is halfback dive, at some point you become uninterested in halfback dive. Very similar to how we've talked about Alvin Kamara being disinterested in games over the last few years of the Carmichael offense. But just speculation. I'll throw some on Jamal, throw some on the coaching staff, and I'll throw some on the fact that there were things completely out of control of either party with the suspension and injuries and lack thereof running back depth / talent.
Well, and look, and we touched on the offensive line before several times, but I'll say it again. With the way this offensive line played most weeks last year, some of the best power backs in NFL history, Jim Brown, Earl Campbell, Jerome Bettis, they'd have had trouble getting 3 yards and a first down, in some of these weeks behind this line last year too. So I take that in mind as well.
Absolutely. Well, you said that Jamal was a guy that you saw getting the third most touches out of those 3 running backs, the least amount. Do you see that being more of Kendre Miller taking a step, Jamal taking a step back? And I think this is a good way to segue into the Kendre Miller conversation. What do you expect out of Kendre Miller? Because we had flashes of what Kendre Miller could be a season ago. Injuries didn't help. By the time he got healthy, we really thought we had an opportunity early in the year to kind of see what this kid was made out of, right? And then he gets hurt right at the same time as Alvin gets suspended. So what do we expect out of Kendre Miller?
First of all, my expectation is Kendre Miller has to stay healthy. As a running back, as a football player, I've liked him for quite some time. And this, covering the draft with me every single year. You knew that I had Kendre Miller mock drafted to the Saints, going into last year's draft. And when I broke down his film at TCU, not only the national runner-up season, but the years before when he was in kind of split backfield duties. I said that this is a kid that runs with nice vision, very good burst once he sees the hole, nice athleticism in space, and an underrated receiving skills, even though TCU didn't use that. Well, we saw all those things in brief moments last year, but unfortunately, Kendre Miller, who missed the national championship game because of a knee injury that wasn't fully recovered by rehabbed by training camp, so he was already a little bit behind schedule there. Then he re-injured a knee, injured an ankle, had a concussion. If I'm not mistaken, he only played in 8 games last year. And obviously, a lot of those games, when you have an Alvin Kamara, a Taysom Hill, and a Jamal Williams, they're going to get the majority of the looks. So it wasn't. We were only able to see Kendre Miller in flashes, but those flashes that we saw, what did we see? We saw a runner with very good burst, a runner with good vision, and his foot. was able to plant his foot and go. And I was extremely impressed with his abilities out of the backfield. More than just screen passes, more than just checkdowns. He was running real wheel routes, and fairly impressive pass routes, for a rookie coming from a system that didn't use their running backs very much as receivers. So, I expect Kendre Miller, A, to stay healthy, like I said, and B, to expound on all those abilities. I do not believe, although I predict Kendre Miller will be the number 2 back, I do not believe that Clint Kubiak and that staff are just going to hand over the job to him and say sink or swim. No, I think it's going to be a matter of Kendre Miller might be the favorite, but you got to beat out Jamal Williams and a couple of the other backs that we're going to talk about in a little bit.
I think the biggest thing for Kendre is it's hard to say live up to expectations because he was hurt a lot of last year. He wasn't a first-round pick. He wasn't a second-round pick. But I think the expectation for Kendre was to be the future is tough because it's not like you have an Alvin Kamara that's in his 30s or anything. But you definitely expected him to jump in and be a guy who contributed early and potentially raised his game to a point where when Alvin kind of hit that magic age of decline, that there was a real conversation. At least that was the expectation for a lot of people who broke his film down at TCU, a lot of people in the media. That was what a lot of us expected. Didn't get that his rookie year, like you said, because of injury. Staying healthy is going to be a big thing. And I said we didn't talk enough about Jamal Williams last year. I don't think we talked enough about Kendre Miller's injury history either, which is concerning for not just running backs, but any position. But you hope those are things that hinder you for a season or so, and then you're able to kind of move on. So you need him to be healthy. I also think it's going to be really telling. Second-year guy on his second offensive coordinator and his second system. And yes, on paper, our favorite saying, this system probably suits Kendre Miller a little bit better than what Pete Carmichael's did. I won't say a lot because prime Pete Carmichael, I do think Kendre Miller in prime Pete Carmichael's offense, this probably was like a match made in heaven. Now, that's
not right, because and I apologize for the interruption, because we know what kind of receiver Alvin Kamara was. We know what kind of receiver Pierre Thomas was. We know what kind of receiver Reggie Bush was. We know what kind of receiver Darren Sproles was. I believe, now this is hyperbole because he hasn't done anything yet, I believe Kendre Miller has those type of receiving abilities for this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. At least on the tape, when you throw on tape, yeah, he didn't get a whole lot of opportunity to do it at TCU, but when you did see the opportunities for him to catch the ball in the backfield and just the natural playmaking ability that he has, it jumps off the screen at you. And you go, why didn't TCU get him the ball in the open field more? Why didn't they design things around the offense? Now, some of that could be a multitude of reasons. But, yeah, you see that stuff on tape and you go, wow, like this kid could be really special in the right system. It looked good.
And Brendan, you remember my draft profile that I did on him, and how we talked about him the night he was drafted. As usual, the national analysts, they had Kendre Miller's receiving skills listed as a weakness. And when I saw his tape, and I saw a lot of TCU games live too, because I've always liked the Horned Frogs. I didn't see that as a weakness. I saw it as just a guy that wasn't used that way enough. But when he was, during drills at the scouting combine and during his pro day, I saw a guy that ran smooth routes. I saw a guy that had good natural hands. And when I see those two things, along with the explosiveness and the cutting ability, or the ability to cut on a dime, rather, you combine all those things together, and you have the makings of a pretty darn good receiver.
Yeah, and he's a little bit of a bigger back too in terms of height. I also think some of it is just the running style. Off the top of my head, I don't know if Kendre Miller has a track background, but some of it. So there you go. The running high thing probably comes from the track background, right? So he probably looks a little bit bigger on tape that way as well. But again, and you throw track background into it, you have a guy who's pretty dang good on his feet. So you would expect him to be able to break in and out of routes. I have a dog chewing a pillow in the background. That's fun. But yeah, I mean, you see those things, and I don't see it as a weakness. I see it as untapped potential.
Yeah, 100%. And we know that Clint Kubiak likes to use his backs as receivers. So we believe anyway. That if he implements the system that he wants, that he's shown in the past, that both Kendre Miller and Alvin Kamara are going to be used a lot more often, and a lot more like they should. As receivers, both out of the backfield and perhaps, especially with Kamara, split into the slot, split out wide, moved around the formation, trying to isolate the best possible matchups, not only for those players individually, but for everybody else, along the offensive formation as well.
And to continue on kind of expectations, what we foresee for Kendre Miller this upcoming season, or what we hope to see. I think a lot of times with players, people talk about the jump, like the magic third-year jump. I think it goes overlooked how important the year 1 to year 2 jump is.
Yes.
Right? The year 3 jump might be the big jump from being like a good player to like a Pro Bowl caliber player. But the old quote goes like this, and Bob, I'm sure you shared this with your track athletes back in the day. It's about being like 1% better than you were yesterday. And those things, that 1% every day, it adds up to being a lot more over the course of a year. And like that's what we're looking for from year 1 to year 2 for Kendrick. Not just staying healthy, but prove to me that you have gotten better as a professional on and off the field. Prove to me that you have gotten better as a learner, as a teachable young prospect, and show me that those things that you've learned from watching film, those things you've learned from being in the same room as Alvin Kamara, are now translating to being on the field. Those are the things that I also think are extremely important for Kendre Miller going into this next season. But I do see a lot of untapped potential for him.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, you go ahead, and then after that, we'll talk about the big guy, Alvin Kamara, who's fighting for a new contract. But go ahead and get that thought.
Oh, no, I was just going to echo your sentiment. I mean, I listened, the Kendre Miller that I saw against the New England Patriots, Indianapolis Colts, Chicago Bears, for a couple big plays before he got hurt, and then certainly in the season finale against the Atlanta Falcons. If you give me that kind of back for 12 to 14 games this year, then this is going to be a pretty darn good offense and a very well diversified backfield.
Well, let's not forget, we're talking about a guy who's 22 years old, that has only played a handful? Is it maybe 2 handfuls of NFL games in his career? I'd have to go back and really look at the stats, but we talked about it a lot when it came to Trevor Penning and the lack of NFL experience. Like, I think we could say the same thing about Kendre Miller. 8 games.
Sure.
So a handful and a half worth of games for Kendre Miller, his rookie year. And honestly, some of those games are 1 touch. 1 carry, 2 carries, 3 carries. We only have 2 Kendre Miller games that included at least 10 carries. Right? Now, do you expect that volume to shoot up next year? No, I probably expect him around 10 touches a game, 10 to 12, maybe on the high side. But you expect what he does in that with those snaps and with those touches, you expect those to increase, right?
Mhm.
Like you mentioned the last game of the season against Atlanta, and Kendra had 13 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown along with one reception, so 14 total, touches from scrimmage. I still think that would be the high side, but I would expect um, that usage rate to be about the same, but the productivity off of those touches to increase. And that's ultimately what we're looking for out of Kendra. This isn't a situation where, and like you alluded to at the beginning, we're not talking about Kendra Miller or Jamal Williams coming for Alvin Kamara's job necessarily. We're talking about who's going to be the better Robin to Alvin Kamara's Batman, right? And it's a good problem to have,
Mhm.
right? But you got to figure out which one is going to be the better complement to Kamara over the course of the season.
Mhm.
So speaking of Alvin Kamara, still looking for a contract extension. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that because I think wholeheartedly you believe and I believe it'll get done. This isn't a situation where it's going to continue to be prolonged, at least I don't think. Because I think the ultimate goal here is not necessarily like, I want more money, dang it. It is, as Alvin Kamara, need a little bit more security over the next 2 years, and particularly the final year of that deal with nothing being guaranteed. And New Orleans wants Kamara, and Kamara wants to be in New Orleans. So long term. So I believe it's gonna get done. So let's not spend a whole lot of time on that. But more so, I feel like we've had weird conversations about Alvin Kamara over the years, especially maybe the last 5. And I guess my dog agrees with myself. But we've had odd conversation regarding Alvin, right? Because there's like 2019. We go back to 19 where he played hurt. He played with some sort of, if I remember correctly, if my memory serves me well, it was some sort of tear in his knee.
Yeah.
And he played through it, and we could tell something was off. And then as the years went on, you had these moments where it was like, there's Alvin Kamara.
Mhm.
And then you had moments where it's like, who is that? And some of that's injury, some of that's the lack of interest that we talked about. And honestly, I think there is some displeasure between Kamara and how things have been handled. Between the offense just not clicking, between the lack of usage, between some of the players that have even got brought in. Like I remember one, and this has nothing to do with anything that the management had done. But there was one interview where last year where they were asking Kamara about offensive struggles, and Kamara said something to the extent of like, well, it hasn't been the same since.
Yep.
And he was going to say Drew Brees, and then he had to stop himself, and he said something else. Like, it hasn't been the same since a few years ago. But you knew he wanted to say Drew Brees,
Yeah.
and I think the frustration comes with the lack there of leadership's a tough term, but I think it's the right term. Like I do see a disconnect from Kamara and how the offense has been ran. And I don't necessarily think that's all the management's fault, but you have a guy who came in to playing under a quarterback in a system that was top tier, like in NFL history, to the last 3 years being like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And playing for, ooh, let's play this fun game. We get to play this every so often. You guys can play along at home. Can we name every Saints starting quarterback since Drew Brees' retirement? Bob's like, yes, we can, because I have it documented, and it's terrible.
Right, and we can name them, but it's getting more painful by the day to do so.
Right, but Kamara goes from playing with Drew Brees, total control of an offense, to, and I'm including these guys because they started, even though not after Drew retired, but Drew was hurt. So you have Teddy, who was undefeated as a starting quarterback. But Taysom, this is where it gets bad. Ian Book, Trevor Siemian, Jameis, Andy, Derek. Am I missing somebody?
Nope, you named Taysom, right?
Yeah, so that's 8.
Yeah, you got them all.
That's 8, including Teddy. It's 8 in the course of 5 years.
Yep.
Yeah, 19 was the Teddy Bridgewater year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 8 quarterbacks in 5 years, and I can't blame them for getting frustrated and going, like, this is not what I signed up for. And especially this year, because I think for Alvin, it's, we finally got a quarterback that allegedly is the perfect fit and this and that, and it started off terrible. But I do think there's some disconnects. I do think we've had more and more conversations of, like, we went from having conversations about Alvin Kamara being like a shoo-in first ballot Hall of Famer to a guy who is not finding the end zone at the same rate. He was in conversations for being the best running back in the division back when Christian McCaffrey was in it, to potentially the best in the NFL, to not a Pro Bowler, a guy who I want to say the national media is kind of forgotten about just because of injuries, situations, lack of success in New Orleans. Like, there's a couple different things there. But again, we went from Kamara being shoo-in first ballot Hall of Famer to where is Alvin Kamara? And I think those conversations over the last few years have been interesting and odd. But is this finally the year that Kamara is able to kind of turn it around and get back on track to being a guy who, is in the conversation for the Hall of Fame? Or is this kind of what it is? Because I look at Kamara's career and I look at Kamara's stats right now, and it's going to take me a second to get them up. But, like, the way I look at them right now, they're good, but it's not like, oh man, like, this guy really needs to be, in the Hall of Fame, right? So he has 5,800 career rushing yards and 54 rushing touchdowns. I should probably include, let's say, just scrimmage yards. So he has 10,000 career scrimmage yards, and he has 77 rushing and receiving touchdowns. I look at that and I go, hey, man, that's a pretty good NFL career. But you just take the first few years of his career where he had 13, 18, 6, and then 21 touchdowns from scrimmage.
Yep.
And then 15, 16, 13, and then 1,700 scrimmage yards. And you're like, oh, okay. And it hasn't, like, dropped off the face of the earth, but you're talking about a guy who was, like, leading the league. And in 2020, he led the league in scrimmage touchdowns. He hasn't had double-digit scrimmage touchdowns in 4 years.
His first 4 years, he averaged, I want to say 14 or 15 touchdowns. I wrote an article on this a few days, maybe a week or so back, so I might be a little bit off on the number. So feel free to double check me. But Alvin had like averaged 14, 15 touchdowns a year over his first 4 years. Last 3 years, 10 total touchdowns. The first 4 years of his career, he averaged like 82 or 83 receptions. The last 3 years combined, he has like 120 or something like that. And that's with 70 or 75 last year. But even last year, when they used him as a receiver, it wasn't the same as it was those first few years. Last year, it seemed like desperation check down passes or poorly designed screens, and that was it. Again, they didn't move him around the formation. Some of the national critics of Kamara have said, well, Alvin's coming off of a year where he had the fewest rushing yards and the fewest scrimmage yards of his career, and both are true. But they always throw the caveat, but he missed 3 games with suspension and then sat out the season finale. So, as usual, the critics are criticizing the wrong thing. I saw this. I saw an Alvin Kamara that averaged the fewest yards per reception of his career last year, by far. Averaged the fewest yards from scrimmage in his career per touch, by far, and averaged the fewest rushing yards per game, and the fewest scrimmage yards per game. I looked at a per game average because I came, when I did my postseason analysis of all these guys, I came in, thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, I see the totals, and they aren't pretty, but oh yeah, that's right. He was suspended for the first 3 games, and he didn't play against Atlanta to end the season. So I broke it down by average, and that's when my eyes popped out of my head. I'm like, 10 total touchdowns in the last 3 years, and all the other averages that I just mentioned from last year alone, and the year before wasn't any better. This has gotten downright ugly. Carmichael is to be absolutely vilified for his usage of Kamara, but it's also Alvin. You and I have both openly accused Kamara of at least looking disinterested if he wasn't, and I can't say wasn't involved in the game plan early because he always is, if he wasn't involved the right way in the game plan. And the reason I've criticized Pete Carmichael is you have a dynamic weapon, the most versatile running back in the NFL today, and one of the most versatile running backs in NFL history. I will die on that hill. And you Pete Carmichael, instead run him right in the middle of the teeth of the defense. With the poorest offensive line in the NFL in front of him, you do that 15, 18, 20 times a game. What kind of results are you going to expect?
Kamara hasn't made a Pro Bowl in 2 years. To your point, over the last 3 years, Kamara's total rushing touchdowns is 11. In comparison, he had 2 years of his first 4 alone that higher than that number. Touchdowns from scrimmage, he has not hit more than 10 in the last 3 years and has not had more than 6 in the last 2. He had a career worst 4.5 yards per touch last year. I want to ask you this. I'm not going to tell you who the player is, but comparable career stats to Alvin Kamara. Now, Kamara has played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He's going in his 8th year. This guy played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 seasons. Now, with that in mind, it's really 11 because he only played 1 game his final year. But Alvin Kamara's career stats, as my dogs are fighting in the background, hope you guys have enjoyed the first and only podcast where we will have my dogs right next to me. But Alvin Kamara's career stats, again, just going with scrimmage yards and scrimmage touchdowns to make this easy, just over 10,000 career scrimmage yards, 77 scrimmage touchdowns. The comparable player, 12,500 scrimmage yards and 94 career touchdowns. When I say that, is that player in the Hall of Fame, yes or no?
Yes, he is. At first, I was thinking Warwick Dunn, which Warwick is not in the Hall of Fame. But again, when you elongate Kamara's career from 8 to, what do you say, 12 years, 11, 12 years, you start thinking the averages. And I know Alvin isn't as good a runner, at least statistically, as the guy I'm thinking of, but I'm thinking Marshall Faulk.
It's not Marshall Faulk.
No?
Not a good comparison for player, good comparison for stats, right? Completely different running backs. But the player that I mentioned was Marshawn Lynch.
Ah, okay.
Who, again, with those numbers, not in the Hall of Fame. And I don't think will get in the Hall of Fame.
No, because they devalue receivers and running backs in these days. They overinflate quarterbacks, but devalue the guys that they throw to. It boggles my mind, but that's the society we live in today.
A guy who almost had 100 career touchdowns will likely not get in the Hall of Fame. So when I'm thinking those numbers out loud for Alvin Kamara, I'm going, the first 4 years, we're like, man, this dude's going to get in because he's going to have 130 touchdowns in his career. Well, now we're at 77. You go, okay, well, even if Alvin gets 10 a year over the next couple years, he might crack 100. Now, he's going to surpass Marshawn in total scrimmage yards, right? That's fine. But, yeah, like, I guess all of this to kind of pose the question, it's a little rhetorical, and I'm sure we'll get into it more. Is it more of a decline in Alvin Kamara, or more of a not playing in an offense that suited you to the best of your abilities? Or is it fair to say it's both?
It's definitely fair to say it's both. And just like I said a couple of segments ago, generally speaking, when we were placing some of the blame on the offensive play, on the players themselves, some of the blame on the coaches, some of the blame on the system. Let's zero in on Alvin Kamara specifically. We know the Kubiak-Shanahan system makes average running backs good running backs great, and great running backs Hall of Famers. That's just fact. Look it up all the way back to Garrison Hurst and Terrell Davis through the early and mid 1990s. That is fact. We believe that the opportunity is going to be there. I mean, this is an offense, after all, that propelled Christian McCaffrey to an Offensive Player of the Year award last year. I think those same kind of opportunities are there for Kamara. Now, whether Alvin has actually declined, and I personally really don't think he has, but we'll find out. Because, again, this system is going to give him every opportunity in the world to be that feared weapon that he was for the first 4 years of his career. If he cannot do it, A, the Saints are in real trouble. But B, again, then maybe we give Pete Carmichael a tiny mulligan for the last 3 years.
I pulled this up just because I was curious, because you said Marshall Faulk. And for the people who don't remember how good Marshall Faulk is, you just listen to these numbers in his career. Marshall Faulk, total scrimmage yards, 19,000 to go with 136 scrimmage touchdowns. Again, for comparison, Kamara is at 10,000 scrimmage yards and 77 scrimmage touchdowns. That's crazy. Now, Faulk was a 3-time Offensive Player of the Year, MVP of the league. It doesn't get much better in terms of like those type of running backs,
right?
Those stat backs. It doesn't get much better than Marshall Faulk, but that is a guy who's in the Hall of Fame. And Kamara is at like half of his career stats through 7 years. So just for the comparables. So ultimately, to wrap this up, when it comes to the Saints, the running back camp battle, those are the three we're talking about. The Saints will likely keep a 4th running back, at least on the practice squad. They always do. Or a guy that's like a running back / wide receiver / just kind of whatever Kirk was over the years. They'll find somebody that they like to keep around. They always do.
And remember, they really they brought in an undrafted rookie, Jordan Mims, after he was cut by Buffalo last year. They loved him. They found ways to stash him on the practice squad. And they also brought back a veteran that they had on the practice squad most of last year, James Robinson, who, recall, just 2 seasons ago, this would be the 3rd year now, but just 2 seasons ago was a 1,000-yard running back rusher for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's been nicked up by injury since. But my point is, there is quality here. So if Jamal Williams does slip a little bit, I would not be at all surprised to see James Robinson jump him on the depth chart, or a Jordan Mims jump him on the depth chart. I think that there is a lot of competition in that running back room to keep all of those guys sharp this year.
The real question, though, is where's Eno Benjamin? Like, where's Brendan's guy? What's Eno Benjamin doing? Again, to tie a bow on all of it, we know who the starter is. The big question is who's going to be the number 2 guy, Bob. But, I mean, I'll go as far as say it, and I think I said it last year as well. Like, this, on paper, is one of the more talented running back rooms the Saints have had over the last few years. I dare even go as far to say it's the most talented they've had top to bottom since the first going of Ingram and Kamara. You could make the case for Latavius, because I think Latavius Murray is grossly underrated and undervalued for his time in performance. Like, absolutely grossly. He was so good for what Latavius Murray was, and they utilized him well. And that's what I was hoping they'd do with Jamal Williams, but it hasn't happened yet. But I do really think this is a really talented bunch. And if you have any rebuttals to that, I'd like to hear, do you think some of those years with Latavius and Kamara were more talented than this group?
I think that the duo of Ingram and Kamara were far more talented than, because of production and the lack that we've seen. You have to put the Ingram Kamara duo over what we've seen out of this backfield so far, and you probably put the Kamara Latavius duo over them too. I think Kamara Kendra Jamal can surpass them. And I agree with you. Our infamous saying on paper, this could be one of the more talented Saints backfields from top to bottom. But I submit to you the early 2010s, I'm thinking 2011 specifically, you had a backfield of a young Mark Ingram, who hadn't hit his stride yet, but was still talented. You had Mark Ingram, Chris Ivory, a favorite of yours and mine, Darren Sproles, and Pierre Thomas. That backfield just boggled. Now Pierre was again on starting to his own decline, but was still, even as a number 4 back, you got Pierre Thomas. Yeah, I'm taking that backfield over this one.
Yeah, you're doing really well. No, just to clarify, this is the most talented group since Kamara and Ingram. The first iteration of that. No, I mean, you could. That 11 group, yes. If you really want to go back to just Sean Payton and running back groups, I mean, there's a plethora of that you can pull from. Now, we only got one true year. I guess with injuries, one true year of Deuce and Reggie.
Yeah.
But very talented group. Reggie caught 88 passes his rookie year.
Mm-hmm.
Something crazy like that. Very talented.
Oh, yeah, going back to the Dome Patrol days, that offense had Reuben Mays and Dalton Hilliard, the Thunder and Lightning duo of Chuck Muncie and Tony Galbraith. So yeah, there have been some very, very talented Saints backfield duos. I would still take Kamara, Ingram in their prime over any of them. But yeah, Kamara, whether it's Kamara and Kendre Miller or Kamara and Jamal Williams, Kamara and someone, they have some big shoes to fill, and they're going to be counted on, because we know that Clint Kubiak said the Kubiak-Shanahan system. I need a T-shirt for that too. I've said it so often, but the Kubiak-Shanahan system, every single thing they do is predicated off the ability to run the ball, or at least establish the running attack.
I brought up Christian McCaffrey once today, so I'll just bring him up again. McCaffrey's arguably, and I do actually think there was a strong argument, but not in today's NFL, because it's all about the quarterbacks. I do think there was a strong argument that McCaffrey should have received MVP votes.
Yeah.
Last year, but that was in a Kubiak system. So I'm not saying we're going to see the same thing out of Kamara. I really think that this is a group that is going to spread the wealth. I mean, look at the Niners, though. Like, they've had extremely talented running backs over the years outside of Christian McCaffrey. So curious to see how that goes. I think for the first time I'm a little taken back because you said you'd take Ingram Kamara over any Saints running back room, or maybe you said duo.
Mm-hmm.
But at 11, and given you and I have a really soft spot for 2011,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, rookie Mark Ingram, Darren Sproles, Chris Ivory. Was he in 11 or was that just 10?
No, he was 11.
He was 11 as well. And then a fading Pierre Thomas, but like that group. We had discussions of, do we keep Chris Ivory or Mark Ingram?
Uh-huh.
That was a real discussion. That tells you how good that running back room was. Now, Chris Ivory ended up ultimately being the guy who was shipped out. He never, I don't want to say lived, he surpassed the expectations most people had for him.
Yeah. Yeah, he had 2, maybe 3,000-yard years with the Jets. So, yeah, he's a good back.
Yeah. I mean, but he went to the Jets. So,
right.
Like, sorry, Chris, but I hate it for you. You went to the Jets. But, yeah, I mean, and we talk about Mark Ingram a lot, like angry Mark Ingram. Ivory was like a step above that. And I loved how aggressive Mark Ingram ran. But Ivory was like you wanted to get out of the way.
Yeah, Chris Ivory was like the Hulk smash version of Mark Ingram.
Yeah. Man, Chris Ivory was – I wish that lasted longer.
Yeah.
But it's just – and again, that speaks to how talented that group was.
Mm-hmm.
That somebody had to go. That's just the way the cookie crumbled. But no, I think I'd take that group over.
I take that backfield, but I wouldn't take any 2 of that 11 duo over Kamara Ingram.
Sure. I would be tempted if I could have like Darren Sproles in his prime and Pierre Thomas in his prime.
Yeah.
But then you're talking about you're talking about grabbing.
Right.
It doesn't really work. But no, I'd be tempted because you could throw the ball all over the field.
Right. Well, I mean, just like as good as Chuck Muncie and Tony Galbraith were, and I was young, but I remember, people are saying, the Saints are so idiotic for trading away both of them for really next to nothing. And Muncie snorted his way out of town, but that's another story for another time. But people would say, just imagine if they'd kept Chuck Muncie and drafted George Rogers, or kept Tony Galbraith and drafted George Rogers, which they did in '81. And I'm like, you got to use your head here. If they still had Chuck Muncie or Tony Galbraith, they wouldn't have drafted George Rogers number 1. I mean, so that's just the way that works. The Reuben Mays, Dalton Hilliard backfield developed because George Rogers snorted his way out of New Orleans. So, I mean, like you said, you can't take one piece and put it into another. It's just, let alone comparing eras. But by the way, that Dalton Hilliard, Reuben Mays backfield, that's the one I basically did grow up watching. And that was just that's an underrated backfield there too.
Reuben was an underrated back.
Oh yeah.
In general, not a guy that gets talked enough about. I know injuries there, and then going to Seattle at the very end, or wherever he ended up. But yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of things, and you and I like to do this on not just this podcast, but just talking amongst each other, friends, whatever. The ability to look back and find guys and be like, hey, you remember that guy? And about 99% of football fans don't remember, and we can think so vividly and fondly of Reuben, Chris Ivory, like guys that 99% would not remember. It's a really nice thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sidebar, as we close out tonight's conversation, have you ever played? I don't know what the NFL version of it is, but there's a thing called hoop grids or something like that, and that's for the NBA. But it's like a tic-tac-toe grid, right? And one block of that will be like New Orleans Saints like ran for 1,000 yards, and you have to like name the player. You would kill at that game.
Yeah, I would.
You'd be the guy who picks, because it tells you like the percentage of people that use. So you want the rarest answer.
Mhm.
Like you'd be the guy that's like 0.01% of people said inserts name here.
Yeah, there used to be, I don't know what it was called, but there used to be both a sports trivia and a football specific trivia game for money, in bars, back when I frequented them. Okay, very, very, very often. And I used to, I used to clean up on that. So did Jason, my doubles partner and drinking buddy too at the time. We've had him on this show a couple times now, I think. We actually used to, from this one bar specifically, we used to not be allowed to play. It got to the point where we wouldn't be allowed to play anymore. We were banned from playing.
Because you'd win so much.
Yeah.
I got to find the link. I'm going to text you the link to whatever game that is, and it's like daily. And just curious to see how you score, because the conversations like this, where we're reminiscing on dudes that nowadays people would never talk about, or even going back to Saints backs to the late 70s and 80s. Like,
yeah, we didn't even talk about Kyrie Robinson, another favorite of ours to watch run.
That was a guy too. Well, that's the other thing is why 90% of people don't talk about Robinson is because he played on really bad Saints teams.
Right, exactly.
Tim Hightower had a career resurgence in New Orleans that nobody remembers because he was playing for a really bad Saints team. But see, I remember Tim Hightower for that opening touchdown in 2009 in the division? Was it divisional round?
Yep, divisional round
game against the Cardinals, and you're sitting there and you're like, "Oh boy, here we go!"
Exactly.
This is going to be a long one, and then Reggie Bush has probably the signature game of Reggie Bush's Saints career, if not NFL career. So anyway. Well, Bob, we've talked a lot about running backs. We could sit here and have a whole Saints history lesson on running backs at this rate. Maybe we do that sometime.
I hear Alan Ulrich's. I feel Alan Ulrich's head is exploding because he wants involved in this conversation.
I was thinking the same.
We're going to have a show dedicated to that kind of thing soon. John Butler too.
I was just thinking that. I was like, man, we have I could feel Alan breathing down my neck. Let me get in the conversation. Because he's going to be able to out history me for sure. You'll put up a fight, but for me, who was the first Saints running back that I remember watching was probably Ricky or Deuce. So that kind of throws in how far my history goes, because my weekly reminder that I'm younger than you, Bob.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're a busy guy. It's the off season, but that doesn't mean that the articles stop. That doesn't mean that the work stops, because you had your show here tonight. You were with Jordy yesterday. You got Under the Dome just about every week as well. So where can people keep up with you and the multiple avenues of you dispersing your Saints knowledge to the world?
Well, at least to the best of my ability, and until training camp, I'm going to continue to, break down. I've been ranking the top 5 players at each position, through the NFC South. I'm going to continue to do that. You're going to start now about we're going to talk on this show too, week after week. I'm going to start writing about individual training camp battles to focus on. John Hendricks has taken it by position. I'm going to break it down player versus player. For example, Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams for the number 2 running back job, that kind of thing. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be publishing an article about did you folks realize all 4 NFC South teams have new offensive coordinators heading into this year? I didn't even think about that until it just kind of hit me out of nowhere this morning. Like, you know what? I'm going to do an article about that. Now, didn't bother publishing it today for personal reasons, but it will be published tomorrow. I think that'll be a fun read, so give that a read. You can read all those articles and more on my Facebook profile, Bob Rose, ROSE, on my Twitter profile at Bobby R2613. Please check out our Bayou Blitz Facebook group. We are still happily taking membership applications, and by application, that just means you request to join and then join in the fun. Please do so as well on our Bayou Blitz Twitter page. We're looking for more memberships off of that too. It's one big happy family, and especially as we get closer to the season, Brendan and I want to see those membership numbers, not only keep growing, but you members that are already there, you built that group up, you built this show up so wonderfully. We hope that you continue to do so. We're trying to put out the best possible product for you, and we're going to continue to do that for you.
And for me, you can follow me virtually everywhere at BT Boylan. Make sure you get into the Bayou Blitz Facebook group, like Bob said. Get onto the Bayou Blitz on Twitter, X. I still don't know what to call it.
I want to call it X Twitter from now on, or Twitter, because it'll never stop being Twitter to me. I have to incorporate Twitter into it somehow.
Sure. Well, you know what? X Twitter is making life difficult because you now need a premium membership to stream live. So sorry, all the folks that watched us on Twitter, you're gonna have to find us on YouTube, and I'll put out something like that. Crazy, right?
Are you serious? So for example, when I post a link of, hey, tune into tonight's show, and someone clicks on it, they have to have a premium membership to watch?
So when I used to have this set up to where when we went live, it went live on your Twitter, it went live on my Twitter, it went live on my Twitter. That can no longer happen because we don't pay for X Premium or whatever. Yeah, thanks, Elon Musk. You suck. But,
is this where I make my angry Bob face and insert my middle finger?
Not for today's show.
Okay.
If you could save that for the Bayou Blitz After Dark show, we could do that. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, showing your support for everything that we're doing. Remember, head over to your favorite place to find your podcast, whether that be Apple or Spotify or YouTube, and find us there, as well as we'll be uploading all of the audio for your morning drives, your late afternoon walks/run, or cleaning the house, whatever. We're happy to continue to find ways into your living rooms, or at least your earbuds, maybe not your living rooms, but your earbuds, as we continue to.
We don't sound as stalker-ish that way.
I used to say that when I did live TV, like, thanks for inviting me. So yeah.
You did, and I just zipped my lip.
Yeah, so that was a little stalkery sounding. Why would you say that? Now you've ruined a good thing, Bob. You've ruined a good thing.
This is what I do.
That's it. So, is Jim Nance's "Hello Friends"? Does that sound like creepy? Or
honest, and I love Jim Nance, but yeah, I always thought that was a little creepy, and I've listened to Jim Nance for decades, and yeah, I've always thought it was a little bit creepy.
Okay, well, I'll come up with something. I'll come up with something creepy for us from now on. Just
awesome.
Just on your request. But until next week, that's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Bayou Blitz podcast. We'll see you next week.